Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great day. My name is Ethan, the creator of this presentation. Today we'll be talking about adolescent sexual activity and the development of delinquent behavior, the role of relationship context. This article was written by Paige Harden and Jane Mendel. So just before we begin, it's important to talk about some of our key terms that will be seen throughout this presentation, as well as that is talked about in the research paper. So the first term is delinquency. Now this is defined as a few actions, such as painting graffiti, deliberately damaging someone else's property, stealing something worth more or less than $50, taking something from a house or a store, or selling any type of drug such as marijuana. The second term is sexual activity. Now this is defined as sexual intercourse, specifically heterosexual sex, and this requires vaginal penetration for it to be considered sexual intercourse in regards to this study. Our third and final terms are non-romantic and romantic relationships. So non-romantic relationships would be seen as a one-night stand or a hookup without any type of commitment or long-lasting period. And a romantic relationship would be the opposite of this. So we have commitment and a long-lasting period of time that these people are with each other. The purpose of the study. The purpose of the study was to assess the role of genes in the link of sexual activity and delinquency. Now, there is past research done on this topic. However, it still needs to be ironed out a little bit in regards to non-romantic sexual experiences and if it can truly cause delinquency. McCarthy and Casey found that there was a 20% increase in delinquency and a 31% increase in substance use. Other researchers such as Grello et al. And Shulman et al. Found that a lot of these effects only affect girls and women and not so much men. So the goal of this research was kind of to finally come to consensus whether or not sexual intercourse, whether that be in a romantic relationship or a non-romantic relationship, contributed to delinquency in adolescents. So what is the link between genes and sexual activity? Multiple studies have found that a variety of sexual behaviors, including whether a teen is sexually active to the amount of partners they have, are all genetically influenced. In addition, genes influence a variety of other fertility-related phenotypes that are positively correlated with age at first sex. For example, a youth that goes through puberty earlier may have their first sexual experience earlier, and this is just because their genes are taking control. The goals of the study are to extend previous research done on genetic analysis and the association between adolescence and sexual activity. They also want to examine the differences between sexual activity that occurs in romantic relationships versus non-romantic relationships. So if a one-night stand actually affects delinquency more or less than a committed relationship. They also wanted to address two of the following research questions. So the first being, to what extent do common genetic factors account for the associations between delinquency and sexual activity in romantic and non-romantic contexts? And the second one is, after controlling for these common genetic factors, does the association between sexual activity and the development of delinquent behaviors differ between romantic and non-romantic contexts? So for this study, the data was drawn from the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health in multiple ways. This was used to collect information over years to kind of compare how the results may change, as well as to facilitate the comfort of the participants. So this kept them from answering a million questions on one day, as well as it kind of allowed for more comfort in regards to some more sensitive questions, such as their sexual history. They were able to do this in-home interviews rather than an institution like a high school, which allows the participant to kind of answer more truthfully and be more comfortable with their answers. So the samples of this study consisted of 519 same-sex twin pairs divided into two age cohorts. So the first group is 13 to 15 years old, and that consisted of 114 non-fraternal twins and 126 identical twins. The older cohort consisted of 16 to 18-year-olds, and that was 126 fraternal twins and 153 identical twins. 56% of the participants were white, 23% were black, 14% were Hispanic, 3.9% were Asian, and 1.5% said that they were other in regards to this study. So for the study's procedure, participants were asked to write how often they had engaged in each delinquent activity in a week. So as stated prior, this is painting graffiti, deliberately damaging someone else's property, stealing something worth more or less than $50, taking something from a house or a store, or selling any type of drug such as marijuana. They were then given a scale from 0 to 3, 0 being never, 1 being 1 or 2 times, 2 being 3 or 4 times, and 3 being 5 or more times. So then adolescents were then asked to report on whether or not they had ever been in a sexual relationship or had sexual intercourse. Now, when they were asked these questions, they were asked if they had ever been in a special romantic relationship with anyone in the last 18 months. If they said yes, this would be considered a romantic relationship, versus if they were to say no, this would be a non-romantic relationship if they still did have sexual intercourse with that person. So moving into the results, this graph kind of shows us first that there is a genetic factor at hand. So if you look at fraternal twins, we see that the correlation for genetic influence is quite low, versus if we look at identical twins, we have an 0.88, which is significant. We see that this does drop off when we look into the older age group, so 16 to 18, we see that it is still significant, however, it is much lower, and this is especially low for the non-identical twins. So what this tells us is that younger adolescents are strongly influenced by genetic factors, whereas older adolescents are more influenced by environmental and genetic factors. Moving on to our second graph, we can see that for the ages 13 to 15, there is quite a strong genetic influence. So I have it highlighted here. So we have a 93 and a 90 for the younger group. So they're very strongly influenced by their genetics. Whereas if you look into the older groups, I have it circled in red. I'll kind of highlight these two right here. We can see that it's genetic as well as environmental influences that are really taking effect here. So whereas younger adolescents are more running off of what their genes are telling them to do and being sexually active, older adolescents are more influenced by their environment as well as their genes. So taking away from more genetic influences and going more towards environmental influences. So essentially what this slide is a breakdown of the two graphs, just because I know it can be confusing to look at a wall of information and numbers and kind of pick out information from that. So for the first graph, it kind of breaks down that younger adolescents have a higher influence in the romantic and non-romantic sex uh, based on genetics. So they are more likely to have sex based on genetic factors rather than environmental factors. In contrast, we see that in older adolescents, romantic and non-romantic sex is more influenced by environmental and genetic pathways. So the total variance of non-romantic sex in older adolescents was 29%, and this was due to genetic influences. So what are the three main findings of this study? First, genetic influences on romantic sex predicted higher levels of delinquency in adolescence, as well as an increase in delinquency from adolescence to early adulthood. Second, after controlling for these genetic influences, twins who differed in whether they had sex in a romantic relationship showed significantly different levels of delinquency, such that the twin who had experienced a sexual intercourse in a romantic relationship showed lower levels of delinquency versus their twin who had sex in a non-romantic context. Third, there were also significant within twin pair associations for sex in the context of non-romantic relationships. However, the direction was reversed, such that with the twin who had experienced non-romantic sex showing higher levels of delinquency, this also showed a greater increase in delinquent behavior in early adulthood. So this slide is for discussions and further research. So the study brings to light that sexual activity, in particular early adolescence, is strongly influenced by genetics, and these same genetics may also be connected to risk behaviors and psychosocial outcomes evident among sexually active teens. The authors also know that not every relationship is the same and that there are often very different dynamics in each relationship that can contribute to delinquency and delinquent behaviors. So they're interested in potentially doing further investigation, kind of breaking down different relationships and whether or not this also influences delinquency. The first limitation is that delinquency items that were chosen were non-violent rule-breaking acts, which primarily consist of property crime and theft, and did not take into consideration violent forms of delinquency such as fighting. So, for example, the delinquency was defined as vandalism and stealing items above or below $50, not so much getting in physical fights with peers or with parents. Another limiting factor was sample size. So they wanted to investigate the difference between gender and delinquency in regards to sex, but they just simply did not have a large enough sample size to make proper claims. So in future research, they were potentially talking about having a larger sample size to make better claims in regards to this.